Defensiveness is one of the most prevalent relationship mechanisms that exists between couples and often keeps couples at a distance from each other. Defensiveness, when unchecked, has the ability to be a relationship killer. But why is that? Well, let's talk about it from the perspective of a couples therapist. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Kate Balestrieri. I'm a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist, certified sex therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, PACT trained couples therapist, and the founder of a therapy practice nationwide called Modern Intimacy. If you're interested in topics about sex, relationships, and mental health, subscribe to the channel, comment below, and leave any thoughts you might have for this or other videos in the future. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter by going to modernintimacy.com/newsletter. So in today's video, I want to address the topic of defensiveness in relationships. As a PACT couples therapist, I see defensiveness all the time. It's a common characteristic within relationships for couples who struggle with ongoing conflict. We're all capable of being defensive from time to time. In fact, for a lot of people, it happens unconsciously. However, chronic defensiveness can wreak havoc on a relationship and even ruin the relationship if it's left unchecked. Today I'm going to talk about the function that defensiveness serves in relationships and how you and your partner can overcome it together if it's become a problem for you. So first, let's identify what it looks like when you or your partner is being defensive. Basically, we become defensive when we feel like we're being personally attacked. Not so much physically, but emotionally, our character, something that we don't want to see in ourselves. Defensiveness can pop up when your partner criticizes something about you. For example, let's say you ask your partner if they can do the dishes after dinner. After dinner, you go about your nightly routine and notice that before you head to bed, the dishes are still piled up in the sink. You go to your partner and ask what happened, and if your partner takes on a defensive stance, instead of taking accountability that they didn't keep their word, they might get angry or bring up something recently that you didn't do, and ultimately try to shift the attention and blame off of them. This is just one example, but defensiveness can look like anger, irritability, blame shifting, using sarcasm, and stonewalling or withholding. Defensiveness serves a psychological purpose, which is why we do it, when we feel like we're being criticized, sometimes without knowing that we're doing it. It also can create a vicious cycle because when one person gets defensive, well, the other person might as well too, as their own internal protective strategies start kicking in. It can be a pretty unproductive feedback loop unless you learn how to identify when you're being defensive and intervene before it takes over. Your defensiveness is a natural inclination to protect yourself from real or perceived threats. Defensiveness is a form of self-preservation, which is coded in our reptilian brain, or the part of the brain that's activated when there is a threat. Because of this, it may be that you can't stop yourself from becoming defensive, but maybe a more realistic goal is to first learn how to identify what your defensiveness or your partner's defensiveness looks like and what triggers it, and then use more productive communication skills when you realize your defenses are coming up. Defensiveness, more often than not, is a huge problem in relationships. As a PACT couples therapist, I see couples operating from defensiveness all the time, and often they're not even aware of what's happening between them. There are a few ways that couples might notice defensiveness negatively impacting their relationship. According to the Gottmans, defensiveness is one of the 4 horsemen that ends relationships. Defensiveness can escalate conflict. As I mentioned earlier, defensiveness can be a vicious cycle. One person's defensiveness can trigger another person's defensiveness, and it can lead to escalated conflict. You might see this happen even with otherwise smaller disagreements that take on a life of their own, making it really challenging to come to a resolution together. Defensiveness can hinder communication. When you're in a defensive position, the goal of a conversation becomes convincing your partner and yourself that you're in the right. And when we focus on who is right or wrong in an argument, instead of trying to stay connected and trying to hold space for each other's feelings and perspective, everyone loses. Defensive communication seldom ends with all parties feeling heard, which means conflict is most likely going unresolved. Think about it this way. Has anything ever gotten better when you've decided that you're right about something and your partner's wrong? I doubt it. Defensiveness can lead to emotional disconnection. Defensiveness is usually not very conducive to overcoming conflict. So when we're trying to resolve and repair, two of the fundamental traits that can help resolution and repair are humility and vulnerability. And since defensiveness is tied to the ego, it promotes putting up walls, whereas coming to your partner with intention to not be defensive, or the ability to humbly take accountability and express vulnerability in regards to your emotional experience, can be much more connective. Defensiveness can create a lack of trust. When you or your partner show up to contentious conversations with defensiveness, it can create a breach in the trust that you have in each other, that the conversation is being had in good faith. This means over time that you and your partner might stop fighting, but only because you don't trust that your partner will at least try to see your perspective. So it creates a situation where you'd rather not talk about your issues because it really just hasn't worked to do that to this point. Okay, so if you've been watching this video and feeling like you're noticing ways that defensiveness is showing up in your relationship, don't worry. There are ways that couples can overcome defensiveness and develop healthier ways of communicating. The biggest favor you can do for yourself, your partner, and your relationship is to be willing to compromise, actively listen, and hold space for each other's perspectives. What does that look like? It starts with using I statements when you and your partner are talking. Make sure you're both engaging in the practice of I statements. And the reason this is important is because when you say how you feel, you say, I feel this way, instead of you made me feel this way. Even if it seems like semantics or it feels true that your partner was the catalyst for you to feel a certain way, leading with an accusatory statement, you made me, is breeding ground for defensiveness. When we step away from engaging in the blame game, we create more space for fairness and accountability between all parties. Practice self-awareness. Self-awareness in any relationship is so important. You can practice self-awareness by reflecting on your feelings and behavior when you're in a conflict. So, do you recognize any defensiveness in yourself? It's okay if you do. If you don't, I'm suspicious. That's the great part of self-awareness. You can start to identify your own areas of growth so that you can know what to improve on. Identifying and accepting the presence of defensiveness is the first step in paving the way for constructive communication. Try active listening. Active listening is a style of listening that involves focusing on really understanding someone's perspective before reacting or responding to what they're saying. This style of listening promotes communication that's rooted in empathy and being present. With active listening, you're steering away from just waiting your turn to respond and bringing your attention to your partner, listening to their perspective, really hearing what they're trying to say, and responding once they feel they've said what they need to. The next tip is to learn each other's attachment styles. Attachment styles can be a helpful aid in understanding why and how you communicate. Attachment theory looks at the way our earliest and most formative relationships shape the way we engage with other people. If you have a secure attachment style, you'll likely notice less defensiveness in yourself, as opposed to someone who might have a more anxious or avoidant attachment style, where defensiveness might be more common. If you're not sure what you and your partner's attachment styles are, there's a quiz on the Modern Intimacy website, which I'll link below if you want to explore more. Take breaks when it's needed. Defensiveness might not rear its head at the beginning of a conflict, but if it starts to feel like you're going in circles, feeling frustrated, take a break from the conversation before defensiveness has time to creep in. If you notice the conversation is at a stuck point, suggest to your partner that you both take some time to regulate and reflect a bit more on how to move the conversation forward. If you're still struggling after trying all of these tips, work with a couples therapist. Working with a couples therapist can be an amazing tool in getting a neutral outside perspective regarding your relationship. It can be really hard to pinpoint problems when we're deep in them, but working with someone who has experience in training in couples work can be a helpful guide to improving your communication and your conflict resolution skills. A couples therapist isn't there to pick sides or discern who's right and who's wrong. Instead, they look at the relationship as a whole and the context of the individuals who make up the relationship in order to identify the problem and help you both guide toward a solution. So defensiveness is a common response to conflict, but it's essential to recognize its potentially destructive impact on your relationship. By understanding the root causes of defensiveness and actively working to overcome it, we can build healthier, more resilient connections with partners and loved ones. And professionally, open communication, empathy, and willingness to address this issue can be the keys to creating and maintaining thriving thriving relationships. So this wraps up today's topic of defensiveness in relationships. I hope you found this video helpful, but don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more topics like this one, and leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. And if you need more support and you'd like to work with a professional, my team, Modern Intimacy, can help. You can check us out at modernintimacy.com. In addition to our blog that has hundreds of articles about relationships, mental health, and sex, you can schedule a free 30-minute consultation at modernintimacy.com/contact or email intake@modernintimacy.com. Finally, don't forget to check out my weekly podcast, Get Naked with Dr. Kate, on your preferred podcast platform.